Hi, welcome. On this video, I'd like to discuss using the remote collar as a secondary tool. Now, I'm just coming from a session here where the dog owners have quite a bit of land, and they like to have their dog outside when they're outside with their kids. However, what's starting to happen, even though things are going extremely well, this is like their second session, things are going extremely well inside the house. The peeing behavior is going away. The dog's releasing a level of control. Now, what's starting to happen is outside, the dog is digging holes, and as the owner describes, like trying to dig his way to China. Okay, the holes are getting so deep, and so. But again, here's the thing to how you want to kind of look at this type of situation to understand what needs to happen next to make the adjustment, okay, to get the dog to release control outside as well. It'd be no different than, again, dealing with a selfish child, where you're starting to put together a game plan, so to speak, through, say, grounding them with structure, interact. Again, look at this system of training, interaction-based, interacting in specific ways, to advocate, gaining parental influence, okay? But depending on just how selfish the child is, now in this scenario, I use the example of a teenager, say, totally absorbed into, say, technology and video games. It'd be like them trying to find a counter move to what you're doing, and that'll come out in certain ways, okay? You know, you'll deal with a certain level of conflict during a process, but in terms of, you know, of them they want to go over to their friend's house maybe to play video games, or trying to be sneaky about, you know, trying to control, right? Trying to continue on their kind of bad path, right? As you're engaging in a different parenting style. You've aligned yourself, different way of, you know, of investing in the relationship. And so it's very similar in terms of dogs as social animals. What you'll see is when they have a sense of what you're doing, they'll start to make some counter moves. And they'll, in fact, overinvest, which means that instead of digging a hole that's like half a foot deep, they'll dig like a 3-foot hole, all right? Because it's like releasing, okay? It's about fulfillment, control. And so the area that they're in, if it's outside, this is why you'll see this type of contrast between inside and outside, where you have to get into the dog's areas, certain areas that they spend their time in, to engage in these specific interactions, engage in the methodology to get the dog to release control in those areas as well. And so you kind of view it as like kind of shading in the dog's state of mind. And some dogs, understand, some dogs have a higher level of need to begin with, and so you have to be more intentional, okay, with getting in the dog's areas to start to create a different association, because really it's based off of association. So in this case, what I'm doing, again, I mentioned about the remote collar in a minute, but what I'm doing in terms of the method is today I was getting the dog owners to engage in really good integrity of the method in these areas where outside where the dog is dug holes. But here's the thing to understand is when you get outside with a dog, you start to engage, again, they know what you're doing. It's important to have a high level of integrity just taking one step and repeating the sequence right from when you leave the house. Okay, even as you're going towards the area that they're really invested in, understand if you try to just walk quickly or walk over to that area, then start the method there near the hole, is the dog is really gonna, you know, start to push back right away. So that's why it's important that when you're doing this type of exercise, and this is where you want to do it for maybe like just about a 10-minute or 15-minute interval, but begin to apply the method, these interactions, as soon as you step out of the house and you make your way towards certain targeted areas, where again, in these areas as well, is you're going to also, what's helpful is you want to add the down, okay? Start to put the dog into a down position about every step, okay? Just start to hammer those downs. I would say hammer, it's not that you're being unduly unreasonable with them, it just means that you're really establishing the down within the method itself in a very consistent way. So again, you want to really pile on those downs. But again, the whole goal here is to begin to establish yourself, start to fade into the picture in the outside area as well. Okay, you need to start to do that. Now here's where the remote collar again can come online here as a secondary tool, because here's the thing: as you're doing the method will make the dog more sensitive or more responsive to the remote collar just on a vibration setting. Okay, because again, it's how the methodology itself covers off. It makes sense to the dog. The dog begins to release control at a certain level anyway. So it's really the method that's the emphasis through these interactions. But then if you're dealing with something like, say, the outside area, where you want to have the ability to communicate with a dog from a distance and want to speed things up a little bit, this is where the remote collar can be helpful as, again, a secondary tool. So when the dog is getting close to those areas, just vibrating the dog out of those areas. But here's the thing: when you vibrate the dog out of those areas, you're vibrating a dog based on a high level of control, which means that it doesn't mean that you're going to establish you can't ever go into those areas ever. Okay, what you're doing is you're countering a higher level of control being expressed in those areas to vibrate that dog out of those areas until you've established or faded in at a certain level. So when the dog goes back into that area, the dog's going in as a follower. Okay, so I want to make that point clear. But what you're doing with the collar is it's helping to interrupt, okay, the dog's thinking process with expressing those states from a distance. But again, using that as a secondary tool. So again, it's a tool that can be used. I'm not a remote collar trainer that way. I make that clear in my videos why. Okay, it's about things lining up and aligning the right way. You know, the interactions are what change people. Okay, it's what you know, it's how it lines up properly in terms of reconciling the relationship and fading in. But again, the remote collar can be used as a secondary tool. Now the issue too about over investing, understand when you're doing this, is there is some adjustment. So for example, when I'm getting involved in certain situations, especially after like the second session, I'll get more information to say, and just as in this case, to say, well, Dale, this is what we've noticed, we're outside, and then I can tighten up the structure at the same time. I can, again, really, encourage the individuals to make sure the method is coming online the right way in those areas. And even for using another, say, a tool like a remote collar, which again, in terms of how often I, recommend a remote collar, it's not very often, okay? It's one of these things. But again, I look at the situation, and even say if a dog is really a lot of excessive barking, say inside the crate, that's helpful. You want to bring a tool online like that to help to really diminish that state, because it can be very frustrating. It can cause issues with neighbors. So it's not like shying away from tools, totally say, well, I just don't agree with a tool like that. It's knowing when to use it in certain situations, but at the same time understanding how it aligns to the method being the focal point. Okay, so thanks for watching.